Hi, I'm Pastor Stephanie Lape with Cross and Crown Lutheran Church. Thanks for joining me today. Today I want to talk about the power of focus. And in my context, what I'm talking about right now is the power specifically of focusing on God. We all know about the power of focus for lots of other things. If you have a goal that you're trying to meet, if you have something to accomplish or a deadline, of course we understand that if you focus on it, you're much more likely to get it done than just if you're kind of running around bumping into walls hoping that it gets done. Well, the same is true with spirituality. The focus that we have will help us so much in our lives with God and just to get through our lives with a general feeling of well-being. In our denomination, in the Lutheran Church, we don't often focus on what we do in our part of our spiritual lives. We often focus on what God does. We say things like, our own works don't save us, but we have salvation from the cross. The work of salvation is the work of God. And that's true. We say we don't make everything well. We don't even bring up our feelings of faith. In fact, faith is a gift and well-being is a gift. And we have absolute grace from God. And that's true. That's the case. We almost pride ourselves in the Lutheran Church about how we don't talk about being okay, being made whole, being well, being anything that's good through our own good works. That is in Lutheran theology called works righteousness, and we do not believe in that. So we Lutherans would often say, focus on not just your faithfulness, but God's faithfulness toward you. And all of that is true. So I'm not talking about ultimate salvation, which is, of course, a work of God's and God's alone. And I'm not talking about the one that is our Savior and makes all things ultimately well. But we could go so far to the other end of the spectrum and say we have no part to play at all. And that's not very helpful either. We do have a part to play. Now, we have absolute love from God. We have absolute acceptance from God. We have guidance. We have nurturing. But we can not be aware of it. We can close off to it. We can almost push it away. And we don't want to do that. So we don't have to create faith. We don't have to create the grace and goodness that we have, but we don't want to stop it up either. It's like the garden hose is turned on fully with God's grace flowing through it, but we don't want to pick up the garden hose and bend it. You know, there are things we could do to stop it. We want God's grace to flow fully through us. We want to have joy and peace and wholeness. The Bible calls that fruits of the Spirit. Peace, patience, kindness, self-control, those things. We want to have all that, but it's not by our own creation. It's by God doing it, but we don't want to stop up that flow. So one of the main things to do, I think maybe even the main thing to do, is to not stop that flow is through the power of focus. Focusing on where God is in our lives right now. So I think of when I was a child and I was given swimming lessons, and I was always an anxious kid. I was very sensitive to things, including being thrown into a swimming pool. It was very scary to have swimming lessons. I thought I might drown. I love swimming today, but there was a time where I didn't. So my brother or my sister, they were both teenagers when I was a small child. They would take me to the swim lessons and I would focus on them. I would focus as I was swimming from one end of the pool to the other. I would swim toward them because focusing on them gave me a sense of well-being. It gave me a sense of peace, like everything's going to be okay. Worst case scenario, if I start to drown, I'm sure they'll jump in and save me. It just made me feel so much better. Children after World War II in England, they had lived through bombing raids and food shortage, and many of them were orphaned. And they were put in orphanages and children's homes where they were given plenty of food, plenty of nurturing, but they couldn't sleep at night because they had so much anxiety. They didn't know where their next meal was going to come from. They had lived through food scarcity and they had a childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. So one person gave the children a loaf of bread to sleep with and said, now don't eat this loaf of bread. You'll have plenty more in the morning. You'll have plenty more food when you're hungry, but this will just allow you to sleep with holding a loaf of bread and telling yourself, I've had enough bread for the day and I'll have enough bread tomorrow. And that worked like a charm, and all of these children were able to sleep. It's a beautiful thing. You can Google it, look it up. It's called Sleeping with Bread. And that was the children focusing. They were focusing on the fact that they had food. So a lot of things in our faith and our religious tradition is an opportunity, or gives us an opportunity or possibility to focus. We can do so many things in order to focus. Of course, when you go to church, like before quarantine, or now when you listen to worship online, that gives your mind an opportunity to focus. Now, is God's grace there even if you don't focus? Of course it is. It's like my children have love from me as their mother, whether they're aware of it or not. Let's say they forget I exist as they're busy doing their life. It's not like my love stops when they're busy. It's just that they're not as aware of it at the moment. And so that's the case with God and you. Your focus doesn't control God's love, but you will be so much more aware of it when you do the things that help you be more aware of it and help you focus on that. Brother Lawrence calls this practicing the presence of God, and it really is a practice. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the easier it becomes to remember that God's there with you and that everything's going to be okay and that you're surrounded in grace and love and wellness and that things will be all right. So worship is one way. Reading the Bible is another way. I read a psalm every day in the morning, and that psalm just helps me tune my radar to God. I don't read a lot of the Bible in the morning, but it takes 5 minutes to read a psalm. I read it a couple of times. I usually ask God for one phrase from the psalm that'll stand out, and generally one does, and I underline it, and it helps me to just kind of cue in to who God is and the power and the majesty, the holiness, the love, the goodness that God is. I meditate every morning, and meditation is another way to focus. You can meditate on your breath. You can meditate on a scripture verse. You can meditate on a line from a prayer. You can meditate just by listening to the sounds around you. Your mind will wander. It's going to happen. Try not to beat yourself up if you do this. It's the way it is, that the mind wanders, and then you tell the mind, hey, let's come back to the meditation. But that's a way to focus on well-being. Prayer is a way to focus, telling God what your thoughts are, but then also saying, but I affirm to myself what I know to be true, even though I'm worried about COVID, or I'm worried about the economy, or whatever it is that you're feeling. If you're sad, if you're scared, if you're angry, telling God your honest thoughts, but then saying, but I also remember that you have promised that you won't leave me, you won't forsake me, that you will help me through all things, that you will guide me, that you will love me, that, I have angels around me bringing me aid all the time. You affirm to yourself what you know to be true. You can go for a walk outside. I go for a walk a lot most days, and I listen to podcasts, and many of these podcasts remind me, as does religious music as well, of the presence of God. So these are the things that we do where we practice the presence of God. God's always there, of course, but the mind forgets. It's like we have amnesia that falls over us every single day. People have said to me before that, they think I'm so spiritual. That happens when you're clergy, like, wow, you must have a really special relationship with God. I'm nothing different than any other person. If you know me well, and my council members know me well, my husband, my children, my family, if you know me well, then you know I am naturally a very anxious person. I don't know if it's my DNA. I don't know if I know I'm a highly sensitive person, HSP, so I pick up on things a lot, and that can contribute to anxiety. I also believe strongly that I suffered from childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. I had a loving family, but a highly dysfunctional one in many ways. And so I always had to be extremely vigilant. I didn't know if everybody would abandon the family. I didn't know if my mother was suicidal, because she said that she was a couple of times. I did not know where the trauma would stop, because it was happening in really random ways in my family when I was a small child. So that affects you, that's part of, from when I was about 4 to 9, that was when a whole lot of trauma happened in my family. And that is a developmentally, like a vulnerable time for kids. So for whatever reason, it developed in me that way. And so I'm naturally wired to be very vigilant, very anxious, not highly functioning, but I am highly functioning, not because it's natural, but because every single day I focus. So it's kind of like if you were hearing from somebody that was like a mountain climber. If you heard somebody say, well, I've always been athletic and I've always been a great mountain climber, and yeah, it was easy, you might be like, well, great. I mean, that's fantastic, but that doesn't mean anything for me. But if you heard somebody say, I was paralyzed as a kid. I could barely move. I could barely walk, or I had some debilitating disease or accident where I couldn't climb up anything. But then I practiced every day and I worked out and I lifted those muscles and I did physical therapy. And now not only do I walk, I climb a mountain and I climb it every single day. Then you might say, wow, I mean, look how far you came and look how far you go now. That's my story. You might have only known me for the last couple of years or maybe recently through these videos, and I get it, especially if you hear from clergy. They might sound like they've got it all together and that they naturally have this like inclination to be totally tuned into God and spiritual and, holy. That's not true. My natural inclination is to be afraid. My natural inclination is to be distracted. My natural inclination is to be worried about everything. And to remember my childhood, which was always difficult. Not always. It was loving too, very loving, but many times difficult. So the fact that I'm not that person is only because I work out every day spiritually. And if I can come from where I came from and completely rely on God now, and I have a lot of peace. I still have moments of anxiety, especially when I'm tired, like in the evenings. I get anxious a little bit, and then I just have to go to sleep. But generally throughout the day, I feel really good. A lot. Almost always. I'm not struggling with depression or chronic anxiety or, big issues like that. I'm able to be a wife and a mother and a pastor and an author and do the things that I want to do in this life, totally trusting in God. Why? Because I practice. I practice focusing. I do it all day long, but particularly in the mornings. I have a time where I really, really delve in to meditation and the Bible, and I write a gratitude list, and I go for a walk and all of that. And so throughout the day, if something happens where I might feel anxious or kind of unglued, I had that muscle building session in the morning, so it's just easy to climb the mountain again later on in the day. So I hope this gives you hope, whoever you are. If you've come from a childhood like mine, if you've come from an idyllic situation, if you're wired more like me to be sensitive or anxious, or if you're not, whoever you are, it doesn't hurt. It only helps to practice focusing on the goodness and the reliability and the trustworthiness and the faithfulness and the love and the grace and the mercy of God. It only helps because you do it proactively before you start the day. Then no matter what happens, you have that muscle already primed and ready, and you can climb that mountain quite easily. I'm telling you, I know life before and after these practices, and it makes all the difference. So I pray that you learn something from this about the power of focusing on God. If you want to talk to me about specifics and how this can help you, get a hold of me either in the comment section down below or call my church or somehow get a hold of me. And my prayers are with you, that you just know that God is present right there with you and that you are absolutely loved, cared for, and that things are going to be okay.